electric smart home solutions. There were massive protests today in Kathmandu, right outside the Parliament building in Nepal. It was led by Gen Z youngsters who were out in huge numbers to defy the ban on social media platforms that was installed by the KP government in Nepal. These youngsters were aghast that some of the most popular youth platforms like Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, etc. were all being summarily banned by the Oli government in the name of upholding public morality. The police had to open fire. At least 19 protesters are said to be dead in the police firing. The toll could rise further. This shows yet again what a tinderbox India's neighborhood is turning out to be. We saw this in Bangladesh last year, the unprecedented protest that led to the ouster of the long-standing ruler there, Sheikh Hasina. She had to flee in exile to India. Earlier, we saw protests again in Sri Lanka, where young people took to the streets because of the economic crisis, because of runaway inflation. And now we're seeing this in Nepal. Is it time to probe if there is something larger, something bigger at play, if there is a conspiracy of sorts that is happening all around India's neighborhood in a bid to try and weaken India's periphery? And if there is, then who is at play here? Who is the one who is conspiring here to weaken India's neighborhood? But I want to first bring you up to speed with some of the defining moments of the protest today. I want to go across to our video wall. Gen Z Nepali protesters tried to enter the iconic Nepali Parliament building. They tried to storm the building amidst heavy security. You can see some parts of the building being set on fire too. Demonstrators gathered at the entrance of the Parliament complex. This was during a massive protest that was happening. There was a lot of issues. There's corruption, there is runaway inflation, joblessness, and of course the trigger was the government's decision to block several social media platforms, very popular ones including Instagram and WhatsApp. Then you have the unrest that was filmed. The police had to resort first to lathi charge, then tear gas, and eventually they had to fire at these individuals, fire at these Gen Z protesters, in which at least, and this is the latest count, it could go up further, at least 19 people are feared to be dead. This is in Kathmandu alone. Remember, there were protests in other cities as well. It was a step-by-step process. The police initially had to fire rubber bullets, then tear gas, and then eventually, once they saw that they were in no position to control the crowds, they had to fire live bullets against these young protesters. And as the protests spiraled out of hand, police fired water cannons, tear gas shells, and eventually live bullets in a bid to try and disperse the protesters. You can see the canisters being thrown around. You can see columns of police and rapid action personnel being deployed to try and gain control of the rapidly deteriorating situation on the ground. And all of this is happening outside the iconic Nepali Parliament building. This is the same place where more than 10, almost 15 years ago, there were mass protests against the monarchy. And now today, it's young people who are protesting against the KP government, against its diktat of a complete and outright ban on all social media platforms. I want to play out what the Prime Minister of Nepal said in a bid to try and assuage the feelings of these young protesters, but they would have none of it. So much so, look at the crowds, massive crowds, all the way leading up to the Parliament building. You can see malls, cinema halls, apartment buildings, all on the left of where these individuals are protesting. There's a bank, there's a hotel, there's a cinema complex, apartment buildings, and this entire road leading all the way up past this bridge to the Parliament complex was jam-packed with young protesters who were at a standoff with the police. Let's try and play what Prime Minister KP Oli of Nepal said, and then we'll bring in a special guest as well and try and get a sense of what the ground situation is right now in Kathmandu.
हामी हुन त सीमानाको छलफल, सार्वभौम सत्ताको छलफल, स्वाधीनता र स्वतन्त्रताको छलफल गरिरहेका छौँ नि। मान्छे पहिले आफै स्वतन्त्र छैन, आफ्नै खोपडी स्वतन्त्र छैन, आफै चिन्तन स्वतन्त्र ढङ्गले चिन्तन गर्न सक्दैन भने अनि त्यसले स्वतन्त्रता कहाँबाट स्वतन्त्र ल्याउँछ? अलि घाक बुद्धिजीवीहरूको एउटा घाक पत्रिकामा आज एउटा इन्टरभ्यू देखाएको थिएँ मैले, भव्य तस्बिर समेत, व्यक्तित्ववाला तस्बिर समेत आएको थियो। मेसेज बुझ्न नसक्ने, मेसेन्जरमाथि नियन्त्रण गर्ने भन्ने तुकबन्दी कस्तो राम्रो छ।
So the social media ban is being seen as the latest flashpoint. There have been years of built-up anger against the KPOL government. Remember, this is not the first time that he's come to power. There is public anger against corruption. There's a degree of authoritarianism. There are poor health and education facilities meant for young people. And of course, social media is seen as some kind of a venting mechanism, a platform for young people to go out and vent their frustrations over the lack of governance in Nepal. But that young Nepalese allege their freedom of expression was suppressed, their freedom of speech was suppressed, and their right to expression was also suppressed by this outright ban, which they are calling unconstitutional. There's also growing frustration among young people over press freedoms being curtailed because of the passage of various restrictive bills that have happened in the last few months since Mr. Oli came back to power in the middle of last year. So a whole bunch of things, it was building up, and finally the government order banning these social media platforms because the government claims that they refuse to pay local taxes there. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, and the political cost of it is now being counted. I want to go across to this piece of breaking news that's just coming through. Nepal's Home Minister Ramesh Lekhak has resigned following the deadly protest that we saw today outside the Nepali Parliament building. It's rocked other cities across the country as well. In fact, Mr. Lekhak, who is the Home Minister, has cited moral responsibility for the loss of lives. At least 19 young people were shot today by the police as the police were grappling to try and get a handle on the situation. There were multiple angry demonstrations. Parts of the Parliament building were set fire to. The Home Minister announced his decision a short while ago, and that is escalating now the political fallout amidst the ongoing unrest. And even now, even in this night hour, it doesn't seem like the police have managed to get a handle on the situation there. The tense standoff is still continuing between young students and Gen Z protesters on the one side and the government and the law enforcement agencies and personnel on the other, who are trying to, get a control on the situation. I want to go across to Ajay Bhadra Khanal. He's a research director with the Center for Social Innovation and Foreign Policy. Can you sort of bring us up to speed with this whole decision taken by the Oli government to ban social media? Why did they take that decision? Why was it announced all of a sudden? And then did they not anticipate? I mean, there were thousands of young students and Gen Z protesters who had showed up today outside the Parliament complex. Was this not anticipated?
Yes, I think I would like to start by saying that today was a very, very sad day. We are all heartbroken and angry. As you said, more than 19 students have been shot to death. More than 350 are still injured, and protests are still taking place. And it's something our generation has never seen before, not even in 1990, a movement for the restoration of multi-party democracy, not in the 2006 movement against autocratic monarchy. And as you said, this is basically the Gen Z movement against corruption and censorship. And the recent social media ban was just a trigger. But just before the ban, a social media wave was going viral in TikTok and elsewhere, exposing the lavish lifestyle of corrupt politicians and the children. And it was not just now, but it's in the recent 2-3 years. The politicians were very irritated by this constant criticism going on in the social media. And as you also said, in recent years, the government has been showing a very authoritarian tendency combined with widespread corruption and impunity. So that's the most important context. We've seen several bills that severely restrain freedom of expression and social organization. We've seen the executive capturing the judiciary and packing judges in the court. It's controlling the parliamentary committees. They have just become rubber stamps for the top leaders. And, they are persecuting opposition parties. So this context where, the government is very repressive and intolerant, especially given the context that the youth are, becoming more politicized and new political forces are emerging in recent years and in recent months. I think mainstream political parties see this as a threat, and basically the youth movement was seen as a threat by the Prime Minister KP Oli.
But tell me, Mr. Khanal, we have seen, such mass protests in Nepal in the past, the most famous being in 2005-6 against the monarchy, and the monarchy, the king was thrown out of power at that time and so on. Why should we believe that this time young people will actually be able to effect some kind of political change? Mr. Oli has been an old player. He's been Prime Minister multiple times in the past. He's been a wily political operative. If he were to climb back on the social media diktat that was passed, will these young protesters go away? Is that the only trigger point, as it were, for their protests? Or do they want to see Mr. Oli and the entire political class out of power, and do they want to establish some kind of a new politics in Nepal?
Things have changed. Today was a turning point. Before today, we could have said that maybe, the old political parties, Mr. KP Oli and Sher Bahadur Deuba, might stay in power. But things have changed from today. And this was just a movement led by the Gen Z, the others, widespread support for the Gen Z. It's massive support everywhere in all parts of Nepal, and I don't think these people are going to let this go. I think people will not rest until these two parties are blown over by the movement. And I don't think we have a regular election after 2 years, but I don't think people are going to wait for the next elections. Things might change before the next 2 years.
And I don't want to get into, conspiracy theories, but social media has a lot of theories floating around about how these are people who want to bring back the monarchy in some form, want to bring back some kind of utopian idea of a political system in Nepal, so on and so forth. There's also talk about some of these people being funded by certain foreign governments, so on and so forth. Is there any truth to any of that, or is that completely speculation at this point of time? This is completely, as you say, an organic protest where young people took grave offense to the fact that social media was being banned in some kind of an authoritarian diktat, and they just took to the streets organically.
Yeah, I think this is less relevant for today's event. This was a very spontaneous kind of event organized by the Gen Z, maybe inspired by things happening elsewhere in the world, but this was a very organic kind of spontaneous movement. Of course, there are multiple factions, some of them may be sponsored by, forces outside Nepal's border, external border. So on both sides, maybe, we have, on the one hand, we have these authoritarian tendencies coming from the north, and maybe, these religious identity movements coming from the south. But I think as far as today's event goes, this was less relevant. This was purely a spontaneous movement led by the Gen Z, and the people, sort of were very happy to see the Gen Z engage in politics.
And finally, how do you see this now playing itself out? What is the culmination of these protests?
I think it's something we have to wait and see, but the anger is genuine. It's very widespread. People are really saddened, heartbroken, but at the same time, they are really angry. And this has spread all over Nepal. In just one day, this has spread all over Nepal. And my hunch is that this is going to grow over the next few days or few weeks, and this is not going to go away like before. I think this is going to create some genuine change.
Okay, we'll see how that plays out. We've seen this in other parts of the world as well. We saw this in the Arab Spring. In some countries, it led to an overthrow of the government. In some others, long-standing dictators and long-standing establishments crushed those movements. But we'll see how it plays out in Nepal. For the moment, Ajay Badra Karnal, thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts and perspective into what has been pretty dramatic and some would even say historic pictures emerging from Nepal today, where young people were incensed by the almost authoritarian and completely irrational ban that was imposed on social media platforms, very popular social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp, instituted by the KP Oli government. They felt it was completely uncalled for, it was draconian, it was authoritarian, and they had this protest march right in the heart of Kathmandu, all the way to the Parliament complex, and there things got ugly between law enforcement personnel and these young protesters. Things got violent, And at last count, at least 19 people had been shot dead in these police live firing that happened outside the Parliament complex. We'll keep an eye out on how that story plays out in Nepal and whether or not, as Mr. Khanal was saying, whether it will actually lead to some kind of a political change. We'll keep a close eye on developments emerging from Kathmandu. Meanwhile, I want to shift focus now to the mounting tensions over the tariffs. There's now a surprising thaw, seemingly, in India-US ties, which emerged over the weekend. President Donald Trump called the partnership with India a very special one and that he will always be friends with Modi. Prime Minister Modi quickly reciprocated that gesture. On social media, he said that he fully shared Trump's sentiments and talked about the positive global strategic ties between India and America. Does this mean that all is well between the oldest and the biggest democracies in the world? Have we now turned a corner, despite all the bitterness and the acrimony, the rancor of the last few weeks around the oil tariffs, around the reciprocal tariffs? Are India and America back together? I try to dig a little deeper. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's prompt response to US President Donald Trump's remarks marks the first political effort at the highest level to try and reverse the downward spiral of Indo-US ties. The India-US relationship had fallen into free fall since Trump slapped 25% Russian oil tariffs on India a month ago, on top of the 25% reciprocal tariffs. The latest Modi-Trump exchange on social media has brought some sharp relief to New Delhi after weeks of acrimony and bitterness. It also signals that both leaders are willing to offer each other an off-ramp after the bellicose rhetoric of the last month since the Trump-imposed secondary sanctions came into effect. Trump was the one who started the thaw. He was asked by a reporter at the White House about his earlier post on Truth Social, where he said that it seems like we've lost India and Russia to deep, dark China. Trump walked back on his comments somewhat and he said he will always have a good relationship with Modi.
I get along very well with Modi, as you know. He's great. He was here a couple of months ago. I always will. I'll always be friends with Modi. He's great. Prime Minister. He's great. I'll always be friends.
This was seen as a potential opening in New Delhi and a window for the Prime Minister to reciprocate and match Trump's gesture. And that is exactly what he did. Prime Minister Modi took to social media platform X. He posted to Trump's video saying that he fully agrees and reciprocates the positive view of the India-US relationship taken by President Trump. This was a signal by both leaders that they are willing to scale back from the depths to which this strategic partnership had sunk in recent days. But there is also a deep concern in Delhi that given Trump's rather mercurial and Machiavellian ways, he could be back to lecturing India about Russian oil next week. Nonetheless, this was a gambit which the Prime Minister chose to take. Both leaders perhaps realized that too much bad blood had flown between Delhi and Washington and that it will take the principals to reach out to each other. But there is also a larger context to why there seems to be this thaw. Earlier in the week, there were pictures from Tianjin in China which played host to the SCO summit. The photographs showed Modi, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin exchanging pleasantries. Those images had wide resonance in the American media. The strategic community in Washington started pushing back at the Trump administration, saying that America is risking losing India to China and Russia. But Trump administration officials like Peter Navarro and Howard Lutnick kept up with their attack dog style of rhetoric even over the weekend.
Well, I think, yes, in a month or 2 months, I think India's going to be at the table and they're going to say they're sorry and they're going to try to make a deal with Donald Trump, and it will be on Donald Trump's desk how he wants to deal with Modi, and we leave that to him. That's why he's the president.
That is when Trump stepped in and praised Modi and gave a sense of reassurance about the India-US relationship. Whether this will send a signal to the likes of Navarro and Besant and Lutnick to pipe down, that is yet to be seen. But Trump has spoken, and it is unlikely that his lieutenants are not paying attention to the signal from the top boss. There is also realization in Delhi that neither China nor Russia are a replacement for America. America still continues to be India's largest trading partner. The defense and security cooperation with America continues. Even as this trade war was being unleashed, the Indian and US militaries were engaged in the annual Yudh Abhyas military exercises off the coast of Alaska. Earlier in the week, there was also the official 2+2 diplomat-level talks that happened virtually with diplomats and officials from both the MEA and the MOD and their respective American counterparts. The idea was to show that institutionally, India and the United States are firmly aligned at the hip, and that it was business as usual, never mind the noise around trade and tariffs. The free fall actually started right after Operation Sindoor, when India and Pakistan went on a 4-day war. Trump claimed on social media and thereafter publicly on numerous occasions that it was he who stopped the war between India and Pakistan. Delhi refused to give him any credit, saying that the ceasefire was attained bilaterally. No government in India can afford to concede that there was any third-party mediation between India and Pakistan. But as the attacks and the rhetoric started stepping up from the White House and from Trump himself, there was a realization in Delhi that Trump wanted to be seen as getting more credit for ending the India-Pakistan war. There was also a testy phone call in mid-June where both sides stuck to their guns. Then in early August, Trump imposed the Russian oil tariffs on India, the only country in the world to have the additional sanctions of 25%. That was a red line for New Delhi. India rightfully felt that it was being singled out, even though China imported more Russian oil and it was not subject to any secondary tariffs. China, in fact, got a 3-month reprieve in its trade talks with the United States. Now the question is, will this lead to a substantive thawing of ties? For New Delhi, the second set of tariffs are a killer blow. It would render Indian exports completely uncompetitive in the US market. If Trump were to walk back on the irrational oil tariffs, India could then signal that it can live with just the first set of reciprocal tariffs at 25%. The question now is, for Trump, what will it take for him to pipe down? Maybe the first roll of the dice has already been played in this diplomatic checkers game. So Donald Trump's tariff war is only escalating. He's now threatened India with more pain. In fact, he was asked by reporters outside the White House whether or not he's willing to move with stage 2 of the Russia oil sanctions. And he said, yes, he's ready. But what may be the nature of that stage 2 of Russia oil sanctions, only the president can tell. But India is also exploring options to absorb the shock of the whopping 50% tariffs that America has levied on Indian exports, and this chill in India-US ties seems to be pushing New Delhi towards Moscow and Beijing. Earlier last week, we had pictures of Prime Minister Modi, along with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russia's Vladimir Putin from the SCO summit in Tianjin, and that set the ball rolling for what the new world order may possibly look like. One that is dominated and determined here in Asia, not so much like the old Western-led order. But is that just optics? What are the limits to how far India, China, and Russia can come together to try and define a new global order? Or can this troika be a real threat to America and the American-led Western order, which has been the case since the end of World War II, and that was 80 years ago? I spoke to Mr. Jim O'Neill. He's the economist who came up with the acronym BRIC, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China. This happened more than 20 years ago, in fact, almost 25 years ago, where he came up with this acronym for the fastest growing emerging economies at that time. A lot has changed in the last 25 years, and I asked him whether Trump's actions are pushing India towards China and Russia. I want to go across to Mr. Jim O'Neill. He's a British economist. He's best known for coming up with the acronym BRICS, or Brazil, Russia, India, China, and of course eventually South Africa got joined to it. But he came up with the acronym BRIC in 2001, and that was for the fastest growing emerging economies at that time. Of course, a lot has changed in the last 20-25 years. Thank you very much, Mr. Jim O'Neill, for speaking with us. So BRICS seems to be, the acronym that you coined 20-25 years ago, Brazil, Russia, India, China, now seems to be, at least from the point of view of the likes of Donald Trump, the US president, a bit of a bad name, some would say, because he's been railing and ranting against BRICS. Earlier this week, we had pictures from Tianjin in China, where at least 3 of these countries and the leaders of India, China, and Russia are gathered together. what is your view about what's been going on, not just in the coming together of these three countries, Russia, India, and China, but also this renewed interest and this antagonism coming from the White House towards BRICS?
Well, I actually wrote something for Project Syndicate about 3 weeks ago in which I facetiously suggested that maybe Donald Trump is a secret agent for the BRICS because he never stops talking about them, which itself lends more credibility than any other previous US president for the past 25 years. It's the first time I've ever heard any US leader publicly making any reference to them. And then secondly, by introducing the extremely high tariffs against Brazil, and then following through with what to most objective observers around the world would regard as extremely peculiar sanctions against India, he's effectively encouraging the BRICS to treat each other a lot more seriously than they have done ever since they first met as a political grouping. So I think Trump is doing the BRICS countries almost a deliberate favor to try and make them work more closely together at the expense of the US. And unless there's some very, very strange, clever, subtle logic going on, I have no understanding as to why Trump is doing all of this. And I would imagine long-time experienced US diplomats must be pretty horrified.
Now, it's difficult to, and especially in the case of Trump, it's very difficult to find rational arguments as to why he's doing what he's doing. But is there any, best possible explanation for why he's doing this? Because it only further pushes India towards Russia and China's corner and away from America's corner, away from the West's corner. So what's the best possible logical explanation, if any, for why Trump is doing what he's doing?
Well, in particular, I'll take your question the other way around. I mean, I have written extensively and repeatedly in recent years that I don't really believe the BRICS leaders have ever successfully achieved much together as a political grouping. And the prime reason being is that China and India, of course, have never really treated each other very seriously. And yet, on the back of these moves, we have Modi visiting Beijing, I think, for the first time in 7 years, and is seen on pictures all over the world being extremely friendly with President Xi and with, of course, Mr. Putin. So that is a direct consequence of Trump's actions, and obviously, on a more subtle basis, is his own claim for being so important in solving the Indian-Pakistan dispute earlier this year. But as to whether there's any logic I can think of, it boils down to Trump's strange personality in that he just lashes out at countries that have offended him. And I think, from what I can tell, obviously in Brazil it's pretty straightforward. He doesn't like the way the Brazilian judicial system is treating Bolsonaro. And seemingly in India, it's even crazier. He seems to not like the fact that India doesn't give him public credit for his role in the end of the, at least for now, the Indian-Pakistan dispute. And it's really very petty. But to be honest, it's quite typical of how we often see Donald Trump behaving. But strategically, it's a very, very, very strange thing for Trump to have done or not being encouraged to stop, given that the US and many other Western countries have made a conscious effort to try and have India playing this, let's call it, neutralizing role inside the BRICS. And of course, to exaggerate the strangeness of it, he has yet to really do anything much to China. In fact, he keeps on postponing the time of any serious more sanctions, and he hasn't done anything to Russia. So hence my sort of tongue-in-cheek piece about whether he is in fact a secret agent for the BRICS, because he seems to be doing lots of things to try and help them become more important.
But Mr. Neil, you also referenced about this earlier, that BRICS as an entity or a concept, it's been around for a very long time, 20 plus years now. It's been around for more than 2 decades. And inherently, they have not succeeded. And the reason why they've not succeeded beyond a point is because there are political problems. For example, between India and China, we have the unsettled boundary issue, which led to very violent military clashes 5 years ago. That because of that contested border. There is also inherent suspicions. But that's on the political side. That's on the military side. Even on the trade front, can these countries become markets for each other? Because ultimately China produces a lot of the world's stuff. India also produces a lot. Is there some scope for India to take in some of for China to take in some of the Indian imports, given that Trump has imposed tariffs on these Indian imports? And can there be vice versa? Can China, for example, be a substitute for the American market?
The simple answer is yes. If you look at global economic growth in the now near 25 years since I created the acronym, China has contributed as much to global domestic demand as has the United States, about 40% each. And the rest has come from a small number or many other countries, most of it being quite small. But actually the third largest contributor is probably India. And so if you have China, despite all its problems, continue to grow at 5%, which is at least more than twice America, and India growing at 6 to 7%, their contribution to the world as we go forward will be even bigger. And here's the central part related to your question, if China, India in particular, consciously tried to do a lot more trade with each other, then it could be transformative to both their own trade relationships, but actually, given their growing economic importance, certainly to the rest of Asia, and as a result of that, indirectly and directly also to the rest of the world. Because at the end of the day, as big as the United States is, it is only 25% of global GDP.
And finally, Mr. O'Neill, do you see any sort of comeback from this situation? Is there any sort of trajectory that you see where Trump is sort of forcing his tariffs on the rest of the world, and there is some kind of comeback mechanism or comeback path, formula, if you will, for India to revive its relationship with the United States?
It might sound crazy, but I'm not sure that Donald Trump has thought any of this through whatsoever, because he just seems to shoot from the hip. I met with some pretty senior Indian diplomats soon after Modi's visit to Washington earlier in the year, and they certainly were of the expectation that they'd get a very favorable trade deal right up there with the best. And something, probably the things I touched on, have changed all of that in the interim, and it's just Trump's emotion. So I would guess that at some point, and here as on so many other fronts, how the opinion polls go with respect to the midterm elections, and if they continue to deteriorate for Trump, which importantly they are, I would guess that at some point, some people in the Republican Party will stop being so scared of everything that Trump tells them to do, and we start to see more internal democratic constraints on Trump, especially on things that don't seem particularly wise from an international diplomacy front, in addition to perhaps on the domestic economic front as well.
All right, Mr. Jim O'Neill, thank you very much for joining us. He's the father of the acronym BRIC. In fact, it went on to become BRICS, and now BRICS has become a bit of a, for want of a better phrase, a bad word in the Trump lexicon. But it seems like Trump's actions are furthering the cement of the relationship between Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump, in his latest remarks, has said that he's ready for another round of sanctions related to Russia's war in Ukraine. He has said no more on what the nature, the shape or form of these sanctions could be, but he said he's ready to move to stage 2 of the Russia sanctions. There is key context from just hours earlier because US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on television a few hours prior to the Trump remarks had called for more sanctions on countries that buy oil from Russia. He in fact claimed that this would ensure the complete collapse of the Russian economy and that India has been prominent on that list. In fact, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, again speaking to an American network, has called the tariffs in those countries who are helping Moscow as the right idea. In an interview to ABC News, Zelensky had argued that buying Russian energy or striking trade deals only prolongs the war and ends up helping Putin.
We all understand that we need additional pressure on Putin. We need pressure from the United States. And I said that I think that President Trump is right about that. Europeans, I'm very thankful to all the partners, but some of them, they continue buy oil and Russian gas, and this is not fair. To be open and to be clear, it's not fair. So we have to stop buy any kind of energy from Russia, and by the way, anything.
Meanwhile, BRICS nations have united against these Trump tariffs. External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar addressed a virtual meeting today, which was hosted by Brazilian President Lula da Silva. In a veiled response to the Trump tariffs and what we've been seeing over the last couple of months or so, Dr. Jaishankar reminded that economic practices in the 21st century must be fair, transparent, and to everyone's benefit. He also asserted that the focus is on stabilizing international economy and the world order, and it's not about replacing the existing world order, it's just about having a more fair and equitable distribution of the global trading order.
Even in the past, our endeavor has been to find common ground between our respective national policies and to act on that basis. Today, the focus is on stabilizing the international economy and the world order. But it is equally essential that we turn our attention to ongoing conflicts, not least because they have direct developmental and supply chain implications. Furthermore, as we head towards the next UN General Assembly session, the world as a collective is seeking a stable and predictable environment for trade and investment. At the same time, it is imperative that economic practices are fair, transparent, and to everyone's benefit. Trade patterns and market access are today prominent issues in the global economic discourse. The world requires constructive and cooperative approaches to promote trade that is sustainable.
All right, I want to just home in on that point that the External Affairs Minister made. This is his address to the BRICS summit. It was a virtual summit. It was convened by the Brazilian President Lula da Silva. This is what the External Affairs Minister has said, and I quote, "The international trading system is based on the foundational principles of open, fair, transparent, non-discriminatory, inclusive, equitable, and a rules-based approach with special and differential treatment for developing countries. India strongly believes that this should be protected and nurtured. Selective protection cannot be a global answer." I want to go across to Siddhant. Siddhant, so the minister, again, being very careful not to name America, not to name Donald Trump, simply saying that the global trading system has to be fair, transparent, non-discriminatory, equitable, and inclusive, and India is a big votary of that. How do you read it?
Well, that's right, Zakka. It's a very well articulated remark by EMS Jaishankar. And as you rightly said, on one end where this address talks about economic practices need to be fair, transparent, and for everyone's benefit. In fact, EM did underline the importance of increasing barriers and complicating transactions, rules-based approach for international trading system. In fact, EM also mentioned that how some of the biggest trade deficit that India has is with the BRICS country, perhaps without naming China. EM did mention that. At the same time, at the very start of his remark, Zakka, he did speak about the impact of ongoing conflict in Europe and West Asia. on the global on the geopolitics, and also how this volatility in trade and investment flows, extreme climate events, and slowing down of the SDG agenda. So it's a very well articulated remarks by EM S. Jaishankar, and also, Zakka, very important to highlight that India did not participate at the leaders level. India nominated EM S. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs, to represent India's position at the BRICS virtual meet, perhaps again messaging to the United States.
All right, so the Foreign Minister making it clear that India believes in a fair, inclusive and equitable trading system, and that India is a ardent proponent of that, and it should not be changed or appended in any form or fashion. Like I said, he's not named America nor named President Trump, but I think the signaling was very, very clear. Let's now move on to other domestic stories. And Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge found himself in a bit of a soup. He's landed in yet another controversy after a sharp exchange that he had with a farmer who had come to complain to him in some kind of open meeting that he had. This was in his native Kalaburgi. That's where Mr. Kharge hails from. The farmer who says that he suffered crop loss of 4 acres because of heavy rain and unseasonal rain, monsoon rains that have been ravaging large parts of Karnataka. He wanted Mr. Kharge's help. However, Kharge compared his own losses to the farmer's land and accused him of staging a publicity stunt. In fact, he told him to take his complaints to Prime Minister Modi and to Amit Shah. That video of that exchange between Kharge and this farmer, that video has now gone viral. The BJP has slammed Kharge for insulting farmers, while the JDS has accused him of mocking the farming community, saying that the Congress cares for farmers only in speeches and manifestos. I want to play out that exchange that happened between the Congress president and this said farmer in question, and what exactly happened there and why this has led to a huge political blowback against Mr. Kharge.
ನನ್ನ 40 ಎಕರೆ ನಂದು ಇದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ವರ್ಷ ಆಗಿದೆ. ನನಗೇನು ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು, ಅದೇನು 6 ಆಡದವಳು ಮುಂದೆ 3 ಆಡದವಳು ಮುಂದೆ ಕೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಆಯ್ತು, ಗೊತ್ತದ, ಪಬ್ಲಿಸಿಟಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳಕ್ ಬರಬೇಡ. ನನಗೆ ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತದ. ಹೆಸರು ಹೋಗ್ಯದ, ಉದ್ದು ಹೋಗ್ಯದ, ತೊಗರಿ ಹೋಗ್ಯದ. ನೀ ಏನು ಸಸ್ಟೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೋದು, ನಮಗೆ ಸಸ್ಟೇನ್ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಇಷ್ಟಿಷ್ಟು ಏರಿಯಾದಾಗ ಬಿತ್ತು. ಓಕೆ, ಮೋದಿ ಶಾ ಕೇಳಿ ತೊಗರಿ.
इस पार्टी के सम्माननीय अध्यक्ष हैं खरगे साहब। एक गरीब किसान 4 एकड़ या 4 बीघा वाला अपनी मटर की खेती बाढ़ और बरसात में बर्बाद हो गई, उसकी पीड़ा बताने गया था। तो कहे यहां क्यों आए हो, तुम्हारा दिखावा क्या करते हो, तुम्हारा 4 बीघा है, 4 एकड़, मेरा 40 एकड़ बर्बाद हो गया। तो पहली बात हमें मालूम हुई कि सम्माननीय कांग्रेस के राष्ट्रीय अध्यक्ष 40 एकड़ जमीन रखते हैं कलबुर्गी में, ये देश को मालूम हुआ। लेकिन ये कौन सा अहंकार है? खरगे साहब, वो आपके पास अपनी पीड़ा बताने गया था क्योंकि आपकी सरकार है कर्नाटका में, आप कांग्रेस के राष्ट्रीय अध्यक्ष हैं। तो किसान वहां जाएगा तो दिखावा करेगा, पब्लिसिटी करेगा। तो कृपया करके इस तरह की झूठी बातें क्यों कहते हैं आप?
जो उनका बयान है उसको मैंने देखा, वो ऐसा लगता है कि जैसे कई बार आदमी फ्रस्ट्रेटेड सा नहीं होता कि किसी के क्वेश्चन से चिढ़ जाता है, वो उस तरह का बयान। वो उन्हीं की सरकार है जो वो कह रहे हैं कि मोदी और अमित शाह से पूछो, तो सबसे पहले मल्लिकार्जुन खड़गे को अपने चीफ मिनिस्टर से पूछना चाहिए कि उसने किसानों को क्या राहत दी। तो लोगों को मुआवजा देना राज्य सरकार की जिम्मेदारी है। तो उनके मुख्यमंत्री जी ने अभी तक राज्य में सर्वे भी नहीं कराया, नुकसान का आकलन भी नहीं कराया। तो वो तो विपक्ष के नेता हैं और कांग्रेस के अध्यक्ष हैं, उनको कर्नाटक सरकार के जो उनके मुख्यमंत्री हैं उनको तुरंत बर्खास्त करके किसी दूसरे नए व्यक्ति को मुख्यमंत्री बनाना चाहिए।
It is in the DNA of the Congress party. They speak very lightly and arrogantly with the farmers. Mr. Kharge, he is comparing himself with a very small time farmer. He is having 2 acres of land. Kharge says my 40 acres has been lost. Kharge has got at least more than few hundred acres of land. Out of that 40 acres he has lost. I have lost 40 acres, you have just lost 2 acres. And he is telling him you are coming for the publicity purpose. This type of arrogance. And D.K. Shivakumar, he is threatening farmers. And one more ministry is telling farmers are committing suicide because we are giving compensation.
Clearly, the statement that has been made by the national president Mallikarjun of the Congress, Mallikarjun Kharge, especially against when the farmer who actually approached him and talked to him about his plight, has put the Congress in an embarrassing situation in Karnataka as well, where the Congress is in power. See, the situation that actually panned out was this entire incident took place after a media conference happened, and a farmer approached him and talked about his 4 acres of land that had which is facing the ravages of the rain and because right now Karnataka is facing incessant rains as well. When Kharge made that comment about even his 40 acres are and he's facing maybe more losses, itself now has put the Congress in the back foot for the simple reason that the BJP and JDS are saying that it is an insult to farmers. Why compare yourself when a poor farmer himself is coming across to a leader and seeking assistance? Why are you rubbing it in their faces? And also that sentence that was said that don't try to publicize it. This was said in context with when the media was present over there, and the leader said that because he felt that he was using the media to possibly try to gain some kind of importance to his particular case. But we have not heard in terms of a reaction that is coming from the Congress. But the point also remains that the BJP saying that when a Congress claims that they are pro-farmers, they're talking about guarantee schemes that they're trying to implement in the state. When they're looking at it and they claim about the fact that the farmers are the backbone of society, then how can they go ahead? What other mentality is this? What mentality is this to come and insult a farmer or farmers of the state or of the country as a whole? But end of the day, this certainly has put the Congress government on the back foot, has put them in an embarrassing situation. And clearly now questions are being raised whether is this the mentality of the Congress itself?
Well, the stage is all set now for the high-stakes vice presidential elections following the resignation of Jagdeep Dhankar. Members of Parliament will now vote to elect his successor. The contest is basically between the NDA CP Radhakrishnan against the opposition's nominee, former Supreme Court Judge B. Sudarshan Reddy. Today, the BRS and the BJD, two parties, have maintained that they will be abstaining from the voting tomorrow. They've cited the absence of nota as an option as a key reason for why they're abstaining. Now, what happens is when parties abstain from the vote, then the total strength of both houses comes down, which means the halfway mark, which is required for winning this election, the halfway mark which needs to be crossed to elect the next vice president, that naturally reduces as the strength of both houses reduces. Now, with a few hours to go, both camps are busy strategizing. Here's what we are learning from our sources in the NDA camp. The NDA is planning almost man-to-man marking as a strategy for tomorrow's election. Members of Parliament are being divided into various groups, some from the south, some from the east, some from the northeast, some from the northern states. These groups will be meeting in the morning for breakfast at various ministers' homes, and then they will head together to Parliament. Various ministers in the government have been entrusted with the responsibility of keeping these groups, keeping the flock together, as it were. MPs will then assemble at their respective minister-in-charge's residence at 8 a.m. For instance, all the members of Parliament from Uttar Pradesh will be gathering at Piyush Goyal's residence at 8 a.m. Members of Parliament from the southern states will be gathering at the residence of Minister Prahalad Joshi. MPs from the northeast at the residence of Kiren Rijiju, and so on. Prime Minister will be the first one from the NDA camp to cast his vote at 10 a.m. Thereafter, the Prime Minister will be visiting flood-hit Punjab and Himachal.
Why we have a mock poll is that many a time, or most of the elections, there have been 10, 15, 20 invalid votes.
Right.
We MPs claim that we are well-groomed to be participants in such democratic process, but maybe because of our over-enthusiasm, we fudge and many of us lose our valid votes.
Right, sir.
So in order to avoid that, all the opposition MPs, most of the opposition MPs had converged here and participated in the mock poll.
This vice president election is forced on the nation. We don't know why Jagdeep Dhankar Sahab resigned. He was forced to resign. Suddenly the election came into picture. We had in the India Alliance meeting and other opposition leaders meeting, we decided that we will not field our party person. We will find a neutral person. Therefore, the consensus was on Justice Sudarshan Reddy, whose credentials for honesty and for his neutrality has been celebrated across India. Therefore, Justice Sudarshan Reddy has been announced as a candidate. For we want all the parties. Justice Sudarshan Reddy is not the Congress candidate. He is the joint opposition's candidate. For we hope that all the other opposition parties, whomever represents, particularly the BJD, the TRS and YCP like parties must support.
नहीं, देखिए जो जिस तरीके से वोट पड़ेंगे उससे स्पष्ट हो जाएगा कि कौन किस तरफ है, कौन संविधान की तरफ है, कौन संविधान विरोधी है। जो ये चुनाव होने वाला है, उपराष्ट्रपति का चुनाव होने वाला है, ये हमें नहीं भूलना चाहिए। ये हमारे ऊपर ये उपचुनाव क्यों लादा गया है? ये इसलिए लादा गया कि एक उपराष्ट्रपति का टेन्योर काट कर इन लोगों ने एक नए वाइस प्रेसिडेंट का चयन करने की सोची है। ये भारतीय जनता पार्टी की तरफ से हुआ है। तो बाकी सारे दल, चाहे वो बीजू जनता दल हो, YSRCP हो और बाकी जो भी न्यूट्रल सो कॉल्ड न्यूट्रल दल हैं, वो किस तरफ वोट करेंगे उसी से स्पष्ट हो जाएगा कि वो सही में संविधान विरोधियों के साथ, ताकतों के साथ खड़े हैं या संविधान की रक्षा में वो जुटे हुए हैं। ये ऑपोजिशन वर्सेस गवर्नमेंट नहीं है, ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन वर्सेस दोज हु डू नॉट बिलीव इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है।
And on the eve of the vice presidential election, a new controversy has hit the India bloc nominee. Addressing a news briefing, senior BJP leader Ravi Shankar Prasad asked how can a retired Supreme Court judge meet someone who's been convicted in a corruption scam. The BJP has called the meet a shocking statement on probity in public life. Further calling it hypocrisy, the BJP leader said that Reddy should not talk about saving the nation's soul while seeking support from a leader facing multiple corruption cases and has been convicted by a court of law. In fact, he was referring to B. Sudarshan Reddy meeting with Lalu Prasad Yadav, former Bihar Chief Minister, who was convicted in the fodder scam case.
रिटायर्ड सुप्रीम कोर्ट के जज सुदर्शन रेड्डी विपक्ष के गठबंधन के उपराष्ट्रपति के उम्मीदवार हैं। देश के सोल को बचाने के लिए मुझे वोट दें, यह है उनका कमेंट जो अखबार में आया है और उन्होंने वीडियो रिलीज किया है। और ये देखिए, देश के सोल को बचाने के लिए वो किससे मिल रहे हैं? लालू प्रसाद से। लालू प्रसाद फॉर्डर स्कैम में कन्विक्टेड हैं। आप किस तरह के रिटायर्ड सुप्रीम कोर्ट के जज हैं? जो व्यक्ति कन्विक्टेड है किसमें? स्कैम में, करप्शन में। जो व्यक्ति कन्विक्टेड है स्कैम और करप्शन में, आप जाके उनसे मिलते हैं। दिस इज हिपोक्रेसी। यह गंभीर दिखावा है। कृपया करके सोल ऑफ द नेशन की बात आप ना करें।
All right, so we will have our coverage nice and early tomorrow morning from 7 a.m. onwards here on CNN News 18 for the big vice presidential election. Thanks for watching Brass Tacks from the CNN News 18 Primetime Studio, presented by Schneider Electric Smart Home Solutions.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
As far as Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's comment on tariffs being justified on countries that still do trade with Russia is concerned, CNN News 18 is bringing you more of the inside understanding of the statement as far as the Indian power corridors are concerned. India believes these are statements to push Western agenda to maintain pressure on its rivals. The interview given by Zelensky aims to indirectly target India's position, even though otherwise he has not really targeted India. Top intelligence sources convey that the aim is to unsettle counterparts and test India's endurance. Similar tactics have been observed in past trade and strategic negotiations as well. steel tariffs and visa discourse, all of these are issues that show a repeat US method of controlled escalation. Let's break this down further for you. Yes, these are coming even as some thaw maybe is being seen by some as far as India-US relationship is concerned. But how does India see these latest comments made by Zelensky, who has been very friendly with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and overall with India despite the prolonging of this war in Ukraine? The aim, of course, is to unsettle counterparts, test India's endurance, as has been the case throughout the tariff negotiations. We know that similar tactics have